The cabin lights dimmed as Flight 447 prepared for takeoff. I buckled 5-year-old Tommy into his window seat, his small hands clutching the toy plane his father had given him before disappearing from our lives. 3 years. 3 years since the memorial service, since the closed casket, since the life insurance payout that had kept us afloat but could never fill the void David left behind. "Mommy, I'm scared," Tommy whispered as the engines roared to life. I squeezed his hand. "It's okay, baby. We're going to see Grandma, remember? She's so excited to meet you finally." My mother lived in Portland, and I'd avoided this trip for years. Flying terrified me, but more than that, I'd been hiding. Hiding from memories, from questions, from the pitying looks of David's family who never quite believed the official story. Boating accident, they said. Body never recovered. According to YouTube analytics, 99.6% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. The Coast Guard had searched for 3 days before calling it off. The plane accelerated down the runway, and Tommy pressed his face against the window, watching Chicago disappear beneath us. I closed my eyes, trying to breathe through the anxiety that clawed at my chest. David should have been here. He should have been the one holding Tommy's hand, explaining how planes fly, being the father he'd promised to be. 20 minutes into the flight, the seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers began moving about, and flight attendants started their beverage service. Tommy was still glued to the window, narrating everything he saw to his toy plane. "Mommy, can I have apple juice?" "Of course, sweetheart." I flagged down a flight attendant, and as I turned back to Tommy, I noticed his attention had shifted. He was staring intently toward the front of the plane, his little body rigid. "Tommy, what's wrong?" "Mommy," he said slowly, his voice carrying that peculiar certainty children have when they know something adults have yet to see. "That's Dad." My blood turned to ice. "What? Honey, no. Dad's in heaven, remember?" "No, Mommy, that's Dad, right there." He pointed toward the first-class section, his small finger unwavering. My hands began to shake. "Tommy, you can't—" But he was already unbuckling his seatbelt, scrambling over me with the determination of a child who knows he's right. I grabbed for him, but he was quick, darting into the aisle. "Tommy, stop!" I hissed, trying not to cause a scene as I chased after him. He weaved between passengers with the agility of someone half his size, and I followed, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was ridiculous, impossible. Tommy had been only 2 when David died. His memories were fragmented at best, composed mostly of photographs and stories I'd told him. But then Tommy stopped at row 3, and I watched in horror as he tugged on the sleeve of a man in an expensive navy suit. Dad, it's me! It's Tommy!" The man turned and the world tilted sideways. David. It was David. Same dark hair, though shorter now and professionally, styled. Same strong jaw, same nose that had broken in college and healed slightly crooked. Same eyes, those blue-green eyes that had looked at me with such love on our wedding day, that had filled with tears when Tommy was born, that had stared back at me from every photograph I'd kept like sacred relics for 3 years. But these eyes were different. They were cold, calculating, and in the split second before his expression transformed, I saw something I'd never seen before. Pure, undiluted panic. Then his face rearranged itself into confusion. "I'm sorry," he said smoothly, his voice. God, his voice was exactly the same, addressing Tommy gently. "I think you have me confused with someone else, buddy." "No," Tommy insisted, his little voice breaking. "You're my dad! Mommy, tell him!" I stood frozen in the aisle, unable to speak, unable to breathe. A woman sat next to David. No, next to this stranger who looked exactly like my dead husband. Beautiful, polished, her hand resting possessively on his arm. Diamonds glittered on her left hand. A wedding ring. "David," I whispered. Something flickered in his eyes. "My name is Marcus Hewitt. I don't know who you think I am, but—" "Stop," I said, louder now. Other passengers were turning, watching the scene unfold. "Stop lying. I know your voice. I know your face. I know the scar on your left eyebrow from when you fell off your bike at 10 years old." His hand moved instinctively to his eyebrow, and I saw the woman beside him stiffen. "Marcus," she said carefully, "what is she talking about?" "I have no idea, Vanessa. This is clearly a case of mistaken identity." But his eyes never left mine, and in them I saw a desperate warning. "Be quiet. Walk away. Pretend you never saw me." Tommy was crying now, reaching for the man he knew was his father. "Dad, why don't you remember me? Why don't you remember Mommy?" A flight attendant appeared at my elbow. "Ma'am, is there a problem?" "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "This man is my husband, David Chen. He was declared dead 3 years ago in a boating accident, but he's sitting right here pretending not to know us." The color drained from Vanessa's face. "That's insane. We've been married for 4 years. We live in San Francisco." 4 years. The words hit me like a physical blow. We'd been married for 6 years when he died, which meant— "You were having an affair," I said, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. "Before you faked your death. How long? How long were you living a double life?" "Ma'am," the flight attendant said, more firmly now, "I'm going to have to ask you to return to your seat." "Not until he admits who he is." David, Marcus, whatever he was calling himself, stood up, and I saw he was exactly the same height, same build. "Look," he said, his voice taking on an authoritative edge. "I understand this is upsetting, but you have the wrong person. I've never been to Chicago. I'm a venture capitalist from San Francisco. I can show you my ID." "Then show me," I challenged. He reached for his wallet, pulled out a California driver's license. Marcus Hewitt. But I noticed his hands were shaking slightly, and I knew. I knew with every fiber of my being that this was David, that he had orchestrated his own death and abandoned us. "I want a DNA test," I said. Vanessa stood now too, her face pale but composed. "This is harassment. Marcus, call the police when we land." "Please," I said, looking directly at him, letting all the pain and confusion and betrayal show on my face. "Please, if you're not him, a simple test will prove it. But if you are—" My voice broke. "If you are David, then you owe us an explanation. You owe your son the truth." Tommy had stopped crying, watching his father with huge, solemn eyes. In that moment, I saw the resemblance between them so clearly. The same determined set of their jaws, the same way they both tilted their heads slightly when concentrating. David looked at Tommy, really looked at him for the first time, and something cracked in his carefully constructed facade. His eyes glistened, and for just a second I saw the man I'd married, the man I'd loved, the man I'd mourned. "I can't," he whispered, so quietly only I could hear. "You don't understand what's at stake." "Then make me understand," I pleaded. The flight attendant had called for backup, and now the air marshal was approaching, along with what looked like the captain. The situation was escalating beyond my control, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't walk away without answers. "Sir, ma'am, we need you both to return to your seats immediately," the air marshal said, his tone brooking no argument. I picked up Tommy, who buried his face in my shoulder, and returned to our seats in economy. My mind was reeling, trying to process what had just happened. David was alive. He'd faked his death, married another woman, built an entirely new life, while I'd struggled to pay bills and explain to our son why Daddy wasn't coming home. For the next 2 hours, I sat in numb shock. Tommy eventually fell asleep against my shoulder, exhausted from crying. I stared at the seat back in front of me, watching the flight progress on the little screen, and planned. When we landed in Portland, I didn't go to my mother's house. Instead, I went directly to a lawyer's office. "I need to report a fraud case," I told the attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Morrison who specialized in insurance fraud. "My husband faked his death, and I can prove it." Over the next week, I laid out everything for her. The life insurance payout, $501. The closed casket funeral, the lack of a body, and now the impossible encounter on the plane. Rebecca was skeptical at first, but I showed her Tommy's toy plane, which had a video recording feature I'd only recently discovered. In his excitement, Tommy had been filming when he approached Marcus, and while the video was shaky and brief, it clearly showed David's face, his initial panic, and, most damningly, the moment he'd instinctively touched his eyebrow scar when I mentioned it. "This could work," Rebecca said, watching the video for the third time. "But we need more. We need concrete proof that Marcus Hewitt and David Chen are the same person." "I know his coffee order," I said. "I know he's allergic to shellfish. I know he has a birthmark on his right shoulder blade shaped like Italy. I know everything about him. What we need is a court order for DNA testing. And for that, we need to build a compelling enough case that a judge will grant it." Rebecca filed motions. She subpoenaed flight records, proving that Marcus Hewitt and Vanessa Hewitt had been on Flight 447. She hired a private investigator who discovered that Marcus Hewitt had appeared in San Francisco approximately 3.5 years ago, 6 months before David's supposed death, with a suspiciously thin background history. "It's a long con," Rebecca explained. "He was establishing his new identity while still living his old life. The question is why?" The investigator dug deeper and found the answer in bankruptcy filings and debt records. David's business had been failing. He'd taken out loans from dangerous people, the kind who didn't forgive debts. He'd been drowning financially, with no way out. "Faking his death solved multiple problems," Rebecca said. "It erased his debts, gave you insurance money so you'd be cared for, and allowed him to start fresh with the money he'd been siphoning off and hiding." "He used me," I said hollowly. "He used Tommy. We mourned him while he was living his best life in San Francisco. He committed fraud, multiple counts, insurance fraud, identity fraud, falsifying a death certificate. When we're done, he'll face serious prison time." But I didn't want him in prison. Or rather, I wanted something more than that. I wanted him to face what he'd done. I wanted him to lose everything, the way we had lost everything. The court granted the DNA test after reviewing our evidence. David fought it, of course. His lawyers argued harassment, mistaken identity, privacy violations. But the video was damning, and a judge ruled that the potential insurance fraud justified the intrusion. When the DNA results came back as a 99.97% match to Tommy, David's entire carefully constructed world began to crumble. The media caught wind of the story. "Tech entrepreneur faked death, abandoned family," read one headline. "Man lived double life for years before staging boating accident," read another. Television crews camped outside the San Francisco townhouse David shared with Vanessa. Reporters tried to interview me, but I stayed silent, letting the facts speak for themselves. Vanessa filed for divorce immediately. In interviews, she claimed she'd had no idea, that Marcus had told her he'd never been married, that he'd come to San Francisco to escape an abusive family situation. She was either an incredible liar or a genuine victim. I wasn't sure which, and I wasn't sure I cared. David's new business partners distanced themselves. His investors pulled out. The Securities and Exchange Commission opened an investigation into whether he'd used his fraudulent identity to commit financial crimes. Everything he'd built as Marcus Hewitt collapsed in a matter of weeks. 2 months after the encounter on the plane, David, he'd stopped trying to maintain the Marcus fiction, sat across from me in a conference room at Rebecca's office. His expensive suit was rumpled, his face haggard. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. "I know you hate me," he said quietly. "I know I can't make this right." "You left us," I said, my voice shaking with controlled fury. "You let me believe you were dead. I mourned you. Tommy mourned you. We went to therapy. We struggled with guilt and grief and trauma. And the whole time, you were alive. You were happy. You were building a new life." "I wasn't happy," he said. "I was drowning. The debt, the threats, they were going to kill me, Sarah, literally kill me. And then they would have come after you and Tommy to recover the money. So you faked your death and abandoned us to those same people?" "I paid them off," he insisted. "With the money I'd hidden, I paid off every cent. They had no reason to come after you once I was dead. The insurance money was supposed to take care of you both. I thought I was protecting you. By letting us think you were dead, by traumatizing our son?" He had nightmares for a year, David. He kept asking when you were coming back, if you'd drowned because he'd been bad, if it was his fault. David's face crumpled. "I didn't know what else to do. I was a coward. I know that now. I took the coward's way out, and I've had to live with that knowledge every day for 3 years." "You chose this," I said coldly. "You chose to hurt us rather than face your problems. You chose comfort and safety over your family." "What do you want from me?" he asked, and I heard the desperation in his voice. "You've destroyed my new life. My reputation is ruined. I'm facing federal charges. I've lost everything. What more do you want?" I leaned forward, looking him directly in the eyes. "I want you to tell Tommy the truth. I want you to look at your son and explain why you left him. I want you to face what you did instead of hiding behind lawyers and legal strategies." "Sarah." "And then," I continued, "I want you to sign over full custody, terminate your parental rights, and agree to pay back every cent of that insurance money plus interest. Not because we need it, we've managed fine without you, but because you don't deserve to profit from fraud." "I'll go to prison," he said flatly. "Probably," I agreed. "But that's not my concern. That's between you and the justice system. My concern is Tommy. My concern is making sure that boy doesn't grow up thinking his father abandoned him because of something he did wrong." David was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Okay, I'll do it. I'll tell him everything." The meeting with Tommy took place a week later in a child psychologist's office. Tommy sat on my lap, his toy plane clutched in his hands, watching David warily. "Hi, Tommy," David said, his voice gentle. "I know this is confusing. I know you have a lot of questions." "Why did you leave?" Tommy asked, his voice small. And David told him. He explained it in age-appropriate terms, how he'd made very bad choices, how he'd been scared and had done something wrong by pretending to die, how he'd hurt the people he loved most. He didn't make excuses. He didn't try to shift blame. He simply told the truth. "Did you love me?" Tommy asked, and the question broke my heart. "So much," David whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I love you so much, Tommy. And that's why I have to let you go. Because I hurt you, and I can't be the father you deserve. Your mom is the strongest person I know. She'll take care of you. She'll be there for you in all the ways I wasn't." Tommy thought about this seriously. Then he held out his toy plane. "You gave me this." "I remember. I don't want it anymore." Tommy's voice was firm, older than his 5 years. It reminds me of when you left. David took the plane with shaking hands. I understand. Tommy turned to me. Can we go home now, Mommy? Yes, baby, we can go home. As we left, I looked back once. David sat alone in the room, holding the toy plane, crying quietly. And I felt nothing, no satisfaction, no revenge-fueled triumph. Just emptiness where love and grief had once lived. The legal proceedings took another 6 months. David pleaded guilty to insurance fraud and identity fraud. He was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to repay the insurance money plus damages. His assets were seized to pay restitution. Vanessa, it turned out, had genuinely been deceived. She reached out to me once, apologizing for the harsh words on the plane. We met for coffee, 2 women who'd both been betrayed by the same man in different ways. We weren't friends, but we understood each other. Did you ever really know him? She asked. I thought I did, I said, but maybe we never really know anyone completely. Maybe everyone has the capacity to become someone we don't recognize. Life moved forward. Tommy started kindergarten. He stopped asking about his father. The nightmares that had briefly returned after the revelation faded away again. We went to therapy, individually and together, processing the trauma and betrayal. My mother, who'd watched all of this unfold, asked me once if I was okay. I don't know, I admitted. I thought getting the truth would bring closure. I thought making him face consequences would make me feel better. But mostly, I just feel tired. Revenge isn't what they show in movies, she said wisely. It doesn't heal wounds. It just opens new ones. She was right. I'd wanted David to suffer as we had suffered, to lose everything as we had lost everything. And he had. But it didn't make me feel better. It didn't undo the trauma or erase the pain. It just meant that now, instead of mourning a man I thought had died, I was mourning a man who'd never really existed in the first place. 2 years after the encounter on the plane, I received a letter from David. It had been forwarded through several addresses, filtered through lawyers and prison systems. Dear Sarah, it read, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect you to read this even. But I need you to know that not a day goes by that I don't regret my choices. Not the consequences I face. Those are justified. But the pain I caused you and Tommy. I robbed him of a father and you of a partner. And I did it out of cowardice and selfishness. I've had 2 years to sit with that knowledge, to understand the magnitude of what I destroyed. I hope you and Tommy are happy. I hope you've built a life that doesn't include the shadow of what I did. And I hope someday, even if it's decades from now, you can think of me without anger. Not with forgiveness, I don't deserve that, but maybe with indifference, because that would mean you've truly moved on, and that's all I want for you both. David. I read the letter 3 times, then filed it away in a box with all the other remnants of our life together. Maybe someday Tommy would want to read it. Maybe someday he'd want to understand his father's perspective. But that would be his choice, his journey. For now, we were healing. Tommy had friends, hobbies, a life that was full and rich without David in it. I'd started dating again, carefully, cautiously, with walls up that might take years to dismantle. But I was trying. The encounter on Flight 447 had changed everything. It had ripped open old wounds and created new ones. It had given me the truth I'd craved and shown me that truth, by itself, wasn't enough to heal. But it had also taught me something important. I was stronger than I'd ever known. I'd survived losing David once, and I'd survived losing him again, this time to the reality of who he truly was. I'd protected my son, sought justice, and rebuilt our lives from the wreckage. Sometimes, late at night when Tommy was asleep, I'd think about that moment on the plane, That split second when I'd seen David's face and the entire world had tilted. And I'd wonder what would have happened if Tommy hadn't recognized him, if we'd flown to Portland in peaceful ignorance, never knowing the truth. Would that have been better? Would we have been happier? I didn't know. Maybe some questions didn't have answers. Maybe some wounds never fully healed, no matter how much truth or justice or revenge you extracted from the universe. But we were here. We were alive. We were moving forward. And maybe, in the end, that was enough. Tommy came padding into my room one night, his new stuffed bear tucked under his arm. "Mommy, I had a dream." "A bad dream?" "No, a good one. We were flying on a plane, but this time we flew all the way to the moon." I pulled him into bed beside me, wrapping my arms around his small, warm body. "That sounds like a wonderful dream." "It was just us," he said sleepily. "Just you and me, Mommy. We didn't need anyone else." "No," I agreed, kissing the top of his head. "We don't need anyone else. We're enough, you and me. We're enough." And as Tommy drifted back to sleep, I realized it was true. Whatever else David had taken from us, he hadn't taken that. We had each other. We had survived. And that was its own kind of victory. Quieter than revenge, subtler than justice, but no less profound. The plane that had brought us face to face with the truth had been flying toward Portland, toward my mother, toward a new chapter. And now, years later, we were still flying, not to the moon, like in Tommy's dream, but toward something equally distant and precious, a future unburdened by lies, a life built on truth, and peace found not in someone else's destruction, but in our own resilience. That, I finally understood, was the real ending. Not the courtroom drama, or the prison sentence, or the public humiliation of a man who'd betrayed us. The real ending was the two of us, choosing to keep living, keep loving, keep flying forward into whatever came next. And if that wasn't revenge, if that wasn't justice, then maybe it was something better. Maybe it was simply grace. For ourselves, for the scars we bore, and for the lives we were determined to live fully, despite everything. The toy plane David had given Tommy sat in a donation box in my closet, along with photographs and wedding rings and all the other artifacts of a life that no longer existed. Someday, I'd give them away, let them become someone else's secondhand treasures, emptied of the meaning they'd once held. But not yet. Not until Tommy decided he was ready to let go completely. And maybe not even then. Maybe some things you carried forever, not because you wanted to, but because they'd become part of your story. The painful chapters that made the happy ones mean something. On our next flight, because yes, we flew again, we refused to let fear ground us. Tommy looked out the window at the clouds below and said, "Mommy, we're flying above everything." "Yes, we are," I agreed. "That means all the bad stuff is down there, and we're up here." "That's right, sweetheart." He thought about this for a moment, then smiled. "I like it up here." "Me too, baby. Me too." And as the plane carried us forward through the endless sky, I held my son's hand and thought about all the ways a person could fall and all the ways they could learn to fly again. About loss and betrayal and the long, difficult road of healing. About revenge that brought no peace and justice that couldn't undo harm and truth that hurt as much as it freed. But mostly, I thought about Tommy's small hand in mine, warm and alive and trusting. And I knew that whatever else had been broken, whatever else had been lost, this, us, remained, would always remain. The plane flew on, carrying us toward tomorrow and the day after and all the days beyond that we would build together, one moment at a time, one memory at a time, one small victory at a time. Until finally, someday, the past would be just that, the past. A story we could tell without crying, a wound that had scarred over into something we could touch without flinching. That day wasn't here yet. Maybe it wouldn't come for years. But we were flying toward it, Tommy and I, together. And that was enough.